Well, for a party that prides itself on intellectualism, they're struggling to justify the latest from one of their leading candidates. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, Joe Biden, former vice president of the United States, former Senator Joe Biden, has once again said something that his aides say he didn't intend to say. This is, after famous sayings like "we choose truth over facts," Uncle Joe.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, so that's not the one that he just did, though. Speaking at a campaign event in Iowa, the Democrat presidential candidate, the leading contender for the Democratic nomination right now, said that poor kids are just as bright and talented as white kids. Mm-hmm. Let's just take it at that, Bill.
Sure.
That's an excusable gaffe, is it not? After all, the man's 76 years old.
Well, there are two things here. I want to come back to what he actually said in a minute. But when Joe made his announcement speech a couple months ago, I was very concerned. I know a lot of other people were too. He would just stop in the middle of sentences, and he didn't seem to really be able to follow much of what was going on. You could tell that you had a guy who was running on something like 50 years of political experience, in terms of doing the old backpedal kind of thing. But I thought he was really like a couple of cylinders weren't firing. Really, I really did. And I've seen a few other things with Joe Biden that lead me to believe that he's not as sharp as he once was, although maybe that's damning him with faint praise. So I have some serious concerns about Joe Biden, and I think the thing that bothers me the most about this is if Joe Biden is in fact becoming a little mentally impaired with age, which happens to everybody. Ronald Reagan had the good grace to basically write a goodbye note to the American people while he knew he was losing his memory, and he basically said, well, I better do it now. I'm not saying Biden's in that position yet, but...
And this was after the Reagan presidency.
Oh, yes, right, exactly. So many years after, early 90s, I want to say. So I'm worried about that, and I'm furthermore deeply alarmed at the idea that any political party in America, and the Democrats seem to be kind of heading the list here, but I certainly wouldn't put it past the Republicans, the idea that we would run a candidate who we know has serious physical issues, medical issues. Just the fact that a party would do that is a little alarming to me. I don't think there's any question, a lot of speculation on it, but I don't think there's any question that Hillary Clinton was a very ill person during her 2016 campaign. She went 200 and something days without a press conference, something like that. So it wouldn't surprise me if Joe was starting to get a little flexible around certain ideas. Now, with all of that said, Joe's got a long history of putting his foot in his mouth. And so let's come back to what he said. Needless to say, I think what Joe Biden said was what Joe Biden thought. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think it's a pretty fair statement. If you look at America today, I think he's basically saying is we have areas of intense violence, real poverty, and almost unimaginable social strain in America, and those are inner city neighborhoods that are controlled by Democrats. So I don't know whether Joe was trying to shade what he was trying to say, but clearly I don't think he meant to say that.
No, and I don't think he did either. And frankly, the vast majority of poor people in this country are not black or Latino. They're white people across the country, right. And they're not all concentrated in inner cities. Biden seemed to notice almost immediately that he had said something he shouldn't have. And so let me read the whole quote now as he tries to, as you said, do the little tap dance backwards. He said, poor kids are just as bright, just as talented as white kids. Then almost immediately he says, wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids. No, I really mean it. But think how we think about it. So I kind of lost touch with his progression of thought there, and as I think he did as well. But I guess what really mystifies me, Bill, is the same party that nominated Barack Obama, who seemed to just speak in pre-written paragraphs,
they were.
and as smooth and coming across as that sort of intellectual kind of personality, would then turn away from that and go for a guy like Joe Biden, who is an apparent gaffe machine. Do you think it's the influence of seeing that the country could elect somebody like Donald Trump, who says all kinds of interesting things?
No, I think it's the opposite of that. I don't. I don't think there's a Republican. I'm certainly not a Republican that I've talked to or conservative that I've talked to who has been just uniformly proud of everything that Donald Trump has ever tweeted in the time he's been president. But for us, he is the indispensable man. You know, I can't spare this man. He fights. We take Donald Trump, warts and all, and I don't think we. Speaking for myself, I don't. It's not like I like the warts or worship them or think they're cool. I'm just willing to accept them as part of the deal, and I think it's on balance, a big positive deal. But certainly the Democrats don't want or need something like that. Joe Biden is my dream candidate. I mean, he really is. I cannot imagine a better choice for conservatives to run against than Joe Biden.
Well, this is why I want to ask you whether we should discourage your fellow conservatives from jumping on this and trying to drum Joe Biden out of the Democratic primary process.
No, please don't throw me back into the briar patch. Joe Biden is. I really, and I don't mean this to sound as kind of knee jerk as it sounds. I really think on when you really consider it, I think Joe Biden is a pretty clear example of kind of the political poverty and desperation of the Democratic bench right now. I mean, Joe Biden is leading the pack, although that lead is closing apparently, because he is probably the sanest, most sensible, most centered, certainly without question the most politically traditional guy that the Democrats are running, and yet he is such a terrifically poor candidate, and he was a terrifically poor vice president in terms of the gaffes. Now we saw what happened with Dan Quayle. The press was just merciless with Dan Quayle, but I've seen Joe Biden utter things that make Dan Quayle look like a Rhodes Scholar, and I think in terms of the politics of it, I think it would be just great if Joe Biden is the nominee. A party that runs exclusively on victimization, that's their entire morality now, is the victimhood hierarchy. If they decide to elect an old, white, straight Christian man, I don't see how their own party's going to get behind that guy. But Joe, I used to share the same view that most Americans probably still have about Joe, that he's kind of a good-natured guy, working class background. Yeah, sometimes he slips a little bit, but he's a good guy. Everybody can tell he's basically underneath fundamentally a good guy. And then I watched him during the debate with Paul Ryan during the 2012 election, and I thought, this man is a mean-spirited, genuinely dirty pool playing kind of guy. So as far as the gaffe goes, it's just another strike against him from the people in the Democratic Party who are not going to be motivated to come out for somebody who's at the bottom of the victimization scale. They're going to have to find somebody who's more of a victim to run for their office, and their qualifications be damned. Joe Biden's lead, and let me be clear about this because we're talking about the specific gaffes, Scotty. The fact that Joe Biden is the leader is an indication of how divided the Democratic Party is and how desperate those members of the Democratic Party, who are pretty sane, relatively speaking, certainly, how desperate that party is for that faction of the party to have this be their go-to guy.
A couple of days ago, when he was talking about the shootings in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, candidate Biden actually referred to those tragic events in Houston and Michigan. Do the younger candidates in the Democratic field attack gaffes like this at their own peril, given the fact that so many voters are in that older American sort of demographic segment?
I think what we learned from Kamala Harris's experience about a month ago when she said, "I don't think you're a racist, Joe, but my God, you're a racist." And her popularity just soared, and Biden's dropped.
And to be clear, for those who didn't see the clip, Bill is paraphrasing what actually happened there.
Yes, that's right. She basically said, "I don't think you're a racist, Joe, but you have said all of these things that I find personally as a young black woman, on and on and on and on about how racist it was." And her popularity just leapt enormously. So when you ask, is going after Biden's gaffe a wise decision? I don't think it's a wise decision if you're number 2 or number 3, or trying to cultivate a certain image like Pete is. But in a field of 29 or 69, 47, however many candidates they are, if I'm number 18 and I can put together an argument that is not just, hey, Joe's kind of gone around the corner mentally. If I were candidate number 16 or 18 or something like that, and I said, folks, Joe Biden's career of service is however, I think there's a lot of evidence that Joe isn't as sharp as he used to be, and with all due respect, Senator Biden, and it's a very difficult thing for me to say. But certainly in the era that we're living in now with such rapid technological change and where warfare decisions have to be made in minutes, if not seconds, I think we really need to actively consider someone whose mental agility is a little bit fresher. And not just the mental agility. Joe's been a dude, I'm being the Democratic candidate. Joe served the people for 50 years. But he's been in Washington for 50 years, and I think that's bad for pretty much anybody. Now, if I'm number 18 and I come out with an argument like that, the fact that I'm attacking Joe Biden is going to get me enough press so that I'm going to shoot up in the polls. And the reason I'm relatively confident about this is because Kamala Harris just broadsided Joe Biden, made him look absolutely terrible a month ago. And then a couple nights ago, I forget who the woman was, but another Democratic candidate just smacked Kamala Harris in the face with a 2x4.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Who?
Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii.
Yeah, just whacked her in the face. You've kept people, in jail longer than you needed to for your personal political, bam, 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 bam. And you could just watch Kamala Harris's face melting like at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was really pretty graphic. And so once again, all of this, it really is a question of don't get cocky, kid, but really all of this to me, I find encouraging. The fact that he's making these kind of mistakes and not being called back on it is encouraging, because if Joe really is starting to slip a little bit, that is a process that's going to accelerate. And I'm sorry to say, I know this from personal experience. It's absolutely horrible, and I don't mean to if it came off as sounding like I was making fun of him. I'm not. I have this with my mother, and it's a brutal thing, horrible thing. But that said, if you start seeing signs of it in public under tightly controlled situations, this is a situation that doesn't get better, and most of the time gets worse, and gets worse quickly. And the fact that the Democrats are still riding this horse is an indication to me that at least the people closest to him must be aware of some of this kind of slippage. And the fact that he's still the front runner tells me that the Democrats have completely run out of sane, relatively sane centralist candidates to appeal to what was the traditional Democratic base of working class America. And all of their bench now, all of their young players, are radicalized socialists who are going further and further left, and whose philosophy, if you thought that the Democratic debates were an example in just sheer philosophical foolishness in terms of topping everyone else for the virtue signaling, than what we saw with the American Socialists, the Democratic Socialists of America convention, is where the future is for the Democratic Party, where nobody can say anything without other members of the party instantly attacking them for being insensitive to loud noises or aggressive scents or this kind of thing. So the philosophy is a dead-end philosophy, Scott. And the fact that Joe Biden is the only guy that they've got who is not completely in that camp is an indication of how desperate they are, and an indication, I think, of how again and again and again and again and again, I've been saying this for a year now, I do not see how the Democrats are going to heal that rift between the moderates that support Joe Biden and the social justice warriors that support essentially pretty much everybody else.
For more on what Bill Whittle was saying about the Democrat Socialists of America meeting, we shot an episode of Right Angle this week that you can find on the Bill Whittle channel on YouTube. If you're a member, you can find it at BillWhittle.com. If you're not a member yet, you can become a member at BillWhittle.com by clicking that Become a Member link. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.